Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to the GPE webinar series. My name is Stuart Cameron. I'm the Equity and Inclusion Thematic Lead at the Global Partnership for Education, and I'm joined here at the GPE Secretariat in Washington, D.C. by my colleagues in the GPE webinar team. We're also joined by a wonderful panel of experts who are joining us online, and I'll introduce them in a moment. GPE's webinars started in 2016. They're part of GPE's Knowledge and Innovation Exchange Initiative, which came about as a response to GPE's partner countries' request for additional opportunities to exchange knowledge, good practice, and policy approaches that inform education policies and practices at the country level. The webinar also gives practitioners the opportunity to engage in a continuous practice of knowledge exchange between partner countries, which in turn strengthens and fulfills the national and global objectives of GPE. Now, this particular webinar is the third in a series, which is focusing on collecting and using data on marginalized groups for education. And this series is going to be tackling issues such as how to identify disability, measure inclusive learning environments, the role of community and citizen-led initiatives, and the use and limitations of new technologies in gathering better data. Our main aim is to convene key partners working on these issues and to foster collaborations that can hone and apply new ideas. Before we begin this session, I'd like to draw attention to a few housekeeping items. First, if you're facing connection issues, please let us know via email at webinars@globalpartnership.org. We will have a question and answer session after the presentations, so feel free to keep sending your questions through the webinar via the YouTube live chat feature. And you can also send them by email to the same address, that's webinars@globalpartnership.org. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible during the question and answer session. Please do let us know your name, organization, and the name of the presenter or speaker to whom the question is directed. This session is also being recorded, and we will send everyone participating today resources associated with the webinar and a link to the recorded session. Today's session is about using data in attendance and retention systems to improve girls' school participation based on findings from the Girls' Education Challenge. The Girls' Education Challenge is a fund launched by the UK Department for International Development in 2012 as part of a 12-year commitment to reach the most marginalized girls in the world. In this webinar, we will be highlighting how data from the Girls' Education Challenge has been used to understand attendance and dropout of marginalized groups of girls, and how this data can serve to track and address participation and learning inequalities. Now, this is a topic of great interest for us at GPE because GPE is committed to gender equality in and through education and to ensuring all boys and girls enjoy equal education opportunities in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Ensuring girls and boys have equal access to inclusive, quality education is a core principle of GPE's strategic plan and GPE's gender equality policy and strategy for 2016 to 2020. We recognize that especially for girls from marginalized groups, such as those living in poor rural areas and girls with disabilities, they often face multiple intersecting barriers that keep them from being educated, healthy, and safe. The negative consequences impact not only the girls themselves, but also their families, communities, and society at large. GPE uses its results-based partnership model to work with developing countries to prioritize planning and spending on girls' education throughout the education cycle to achieve gender equality. And together with the United Nations Girls' Education Initiative, or UNGI, we develop guidance for developing gender-responsive education sector planning. And you can find this together with several other resources on girls' education and gender equality in education on our website. Now, allow me to introduce you to our presenters today. First up, we have Rachel Booth. Rachel is the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Manager at the Girls' Education Challenge. She is a social development professional with international as well as UK-specific experience that includes gender equality and social inclusion expertise, designing tools to improve delivery with a gender equality and social inclusion lens, and overall project and organizational effectiveness, and management and coordination of multi-partner initiatives. Prior to this, Rachel has led significant humanitarian work for marginalised populations as part of organisations such as Oxfam, British Red Cross, War Child UK and Child Fund Australia, to name a few. Mark Rottage is a development specialist with 8 years of executive experience with international NGOs, providing technical and administrative leadership for formulation, implementation and review of strategies to improve quality of life for marginalised communities in East Africa. He's currently the project director in Kenya for Education Development Trust and leads the team that delivers the Girls Education Challenge program in Kenya, where Mark and his team are working with schools and communities in marginalised areas to increase access for girls, ensure their retention and improve their learning outcomes. Prior to this, he has served in several organisations such as the Aga Khan Foundation and DFID. Nabin Lamechan works with the Mercy Corps as the Programme Manager for DFID Girls Education Challenge. He has worked on child rights programming since 2002, including on improving the quality of education through disaster risk reduction, psychosocial intervention and alternative education, and a range of multidisciplinary programmes. As an experienced child psychosocial counsellor and trainer, he has developed and used different tools in youth engagement, psychosocial support, and child-centered approaches in Nepal. He has also worked with children in difficult circumstances, such as child soldiers, children dealing with substance abuse, street children, and refugees. He holds a master's degree in sociology, a diploma in business management, and a postgraduate qualification in disaster management. Ian Atfield is our discussant today. Ian is a senior education advisor for DFID in South Asia, based in Nepal with a focus on the Girls Education Challenge. He has worked extensively with DFID for 12 years in a variety of roles and led significant education policy development work in various capacities and in different parts of the world, including Nigeria and Tanzania. Leading the inclusive education work stream of the 2018 Global Disability Summit, coordination of new programmatic commitments, and private sector engagement are some salient features of his work. He also has experience in education data systems design, mapping, learning assessment, and M&E. So with that, we'll get straight into our presentations, and I'll hand over now to Rachel Booth, who's going to start the presentation.
Hi there. Thank you, Stuart. Well, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share in this forum. I think it's really interesting to be able to hear from others, but I'm hoping this learning that we've collected from the GC will be interesting to all of your attendees today. So if we go to the next slide, please. So to give you just a quick oversight of the running order, I'm going to be giving a bit of an oversight of the lessons learnt across the GC, and that will be followed by two projects from the GC giving us their contextual experience and their learning that they have generated from their retention systems. And then we're going to hear from Ian Atfield in terms of summary and reflections on how these systems have been evolving. We can go to the next slide. So giving you a quick overview of what the Girls Education Challenge is all about, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. It's a global programme launched by the UK's Department for International Development in 2012. And there are currently 27 projects in the current GEC transition phase of this programme. And this enables girls supported by the GEC to complete primary school, transition to secondary education, and to progress on to technical vocational training or employment. There's also 14 new projects under the Leave No Girl Behind funding window, working with out-of-school adolescent girls. So we move on to the next slide. So the Girls Education Challenge vision is to accelerate the learning of millions of marginalised girls. And the element that we're going to be focusing on today is this element of the marginalisation and how data systems can really improve our visibility and help us deliver on this commitment to supporting marginalised girls and the broader agenda of leaving no one behind. So that's the element we're going to be focusing on. If you can move to the next slide. So the focus of the learning in these presentations will mainly be on this inner circle illustrated on this slide, the locally based tracking and response systems that happen on the ground around children and around the schools and communities. And we're aware how important that element is as part of the whole and how that operates within and contributes to national data systems that deliver on the national and global commitments to ensure education for all and that we're leaving no one behind. So we can go to the next slide. So before we go into the detail, I wanted to zoom out a little bit and think about what influences elements of attendance in the context that we're working in, and thinking about the root causes of poor attendance and dropout. Because when we're designing attendance and retention systems, we need to make choices about what data points are relevant to enable us to track poor attendance that lead to permanent dropout. So we know that financial consideration, aspiration of caregivers, safety on the way to school are all interlinked with attendance and dropout cycles. But when we're really trying to think about those relevant data points, we then go into further areas where the literature illustrates that there are a number of different groups in particular that are more at risk of poor attendance and ultimate dropout. However, there's a danger in going down that road of using characteristics as a predictor for dropout, as this approach loses that whole social and environmental context that we know is so important when we're thinking about what motivates and influences attendance. Another model that's really interesting is this one, the ABC model, that's illustrated in the UNICEF education participation manuals, which is a really helpful one to illustrate an early warning system, indicators that can help predict dropout. So linking academic achievement with behaviour and absenteeism, and understanding those full individualised pictures and being able to predict whether there may be some girls or boys who are at risk of more permanent dropout. However, for many of the GC projects in resource-constrained environments, collecting this depth of individualised data is difficult. So they have created a variety of systems that help predict and respond to poor attendance. And I'm going to give you a few snapshots of those in just a second. So we move to the next slide. So this chart just illustrates 4 out of the range of projects that are implementing retention and attendance systems across the GEC. And what I'm hoping to illustrate here is that there is a huge variety, and some have lighter resource and some are much more intense. And when I talk about resource, it's not really the human element, it's in terms of the quantity and the quality, the quantity and the volume of data that's collected at the outset, and the type of responses that are initiated as a result. So for example, we have here the DRC project is collecting absence data and data disaggregated by sex and by class and school. And this gives, although it's a broader brush than some of the more individualized data sets, it does give a huge amount of information when analysed in terms of community patterns, regional or seasonal patterns, particular issues with schools or classes, and obviously gives us that gender dimension as well that's so important to tune into. And as a result, they've been able to do some really interesting community level awareness campaigns, tuning into some of those issues that have been revealed through the analysis. At the other end of the spectrum, you have more intense data sets that are collecting much more individualized data and profile data on the girls that then can lead to these individualized plans of support, coupled with potentially awareness raising campaigns on common themes such as early marriage and so on. The key thing when looking at all of these systems is not necessarily about the value of the more intense or less intense, but the things that we are beginning to learn from these systems is the most important thing is that the whole cycle is maintained. It's not so much about the volume of data, it's that there is an oversight of how all of that data is used, and that is put into that cycle of use and response and tuned in to a full cycle of data systems. There's a number of other interesting things to look at when we have collected this learning, not least the technology that's being used. Again, there's a huge variety and some interesting innovation, even in quite a number of remote or resource-constrained environments, that technology is helping, but it isn't the really key factor to really maintaining these systems. The point that I'm wanting to highlight here is about the human element and who responds to that data. That the human ecosystem around that data collection is really vital. It's who is analysing and responding to the data and what roles do each people have. Just tapping into a couple of these examples here, for example, the Somalia project have a community education committee in each of their locations that do the analysis and follow-up with the girls and are able to tune into particular issues. And they've had real success in revealing particular patterns for pastoralist girls, for example, and are able to respond to some of the issues that they might be having. Another really interesting lesson has been learned by one of the projects in Zimbabwe, who initially the retention system was owned by the school structures. However, they've recently moved that to a more community-led structure and are finding that's a much more efficient and effective way of owning the cycle of tracking attendance and response to it. So there's a huge amount of learning that is being generated from these systems that we are collecting and seeing how this full cycle works together. Okay, we can go to the next slide. This diagram, again, that's been drawn from some of the UNICEF education participation materials, is a really useful one, I think, when planning these data retention systems. Being able to think about the resources that are available to do the responses is a really key part of planning what kind of data is needed right at the beginning of the cycle. Without this overview, we are very vulnerable to tuning into a much more tailored approach and expecting to be able to do that and ending up collecting a huge amount of data. But actually, as the cycle of the program evolves, it looks like that actually the individualized response is much more expensive and intensive than we expected, and needing to think about how those group dynamics work and the universal dynamics work. And I think there's a real value in being able to understand where the responses are pitched right from the start of a retention system, so we understand what we can do and what we can't do. But being able to recognize that those universal responses are hugely valuable, whether those are school-wide developments in terms of teacher quality, in terms of safety in and on the way to school and so on, that affect the whole school populations, but a really important part of a picture for many, many students that may be attending that school. So the projects that are going to present in a moment will give you a few more examples of how each of those different levels and how they've been tuning into their data to respond at each of these different levels in this pyramid. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So just in summary, trying to think of the key points and sharing the key points that are important in terms of retention systems, I think it's important to recognise that the data and tech is only part of the process, and that the key features are thinking about how the whole system operates, making sure there is a body of people or people responsible for being able to see how that whole system works together is a really key part of successful retention systems. Motivation to maintain accurate registers is also really vital, making sure that teachers are on board to really understand how vital the data collection is, and that's the absolute bedrock of these systems, is having accurate information to be able to base all the subsequent responses to. Many of the successful retention systems that we've heard about have also included very, very clear definition and ownership of roles and responsibilities within these human ecosystems around the schools and around the children. And that's really important for people to understand where they sit within that pattern and what role they are playing within that. Another element is agreement of what qualifies at risk of dropout and what kind of absentee patterns trigger a response. In some projects, it's 3 days of consecutive absence. In others, they're calculating it over a month period of absence of 8 days over a month period. But being really clear what it is that triggers what at different stages is an important part of these plans. Also is the clarity on what kind of responses are available. And as part of this, I want to highlight the role that links to other actors have in these systems, and how important it is that when the community mechanisms or the school mechanisms are following up with the girls in terms of the reasons for poor absence, that they're really clear what kind of responses they're able to trigger, whether that's within their control or whether that's signposting to the Ministry of Health to provide assistive devices, or signposting to safeguarding mechanisms that means that they can follow up on issues that have arisen as part of that follow-up. But being part of a much wider network is really important to recognise that there are other sources of support that can really be drawn in to support better attendance in education. The other element is about keeping the feedbacks nimble enough to respond swiftly. So we are often thinking about evaluation points as a really significant way of analysing what's happening when. But when we're thinking about attendance, it's really important that they're happening on a much more live basis. We have seen from patterns of attendance that if we let poor attendance go unchecked for too long, that those patterns become very entrenched, and girls have pursued other paths rather than education by the time that data has been analysed and people have been able to respond and track and think about what could be done to re-engage young people back into education. So making sure that those feedback loops are really nimble and responsive is really key. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So as part of all this learning, we're aware that there's plenty more that is being discussed and is being researched as part of our teams. Part of that is how these local level systems connect with regional and national data systems and processes. So this is definitely an area that we're exploring. There's some great examples of some of our retention systems being picked up by national governments and being embedded into policy. But there's real opportunity here for making sure that the data that's collected at that local level is feeding into those wider data and national EMIS data systems and bigger policy change decisions. Another element is how to address capturing and responding to teacher absence within data systems. So that's a key part of the picture. It's not just about the children's absence and attendance, and about how the quality of provision influences parental support for attendance. That pull factor of knowing that the quality of education is worth attending is an important part of this whole dialogue. So understanding where that sits within the whole picture is important. And as a number of the GEC projects are reaching the end of the cycle, sustainability is obviously really important. So maintaining momentum of these retention systems is also a live discussion at our end. And as you saw from the table earlier on, most of these retention systems are embedded in either school or community mechanisms, and the hope is that they will be well established and will be operating effectively by the time the GEC support is withdrawn. So we're hoping that's really going to lead to long-term change and some really effective attendance support mechanisms for girls in the future. So I'm going to finish there and hand over to the next speaker, who will give us a snapshot of how their retention system is working in Kenya. So great, thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Mark, that's all clear. Go ahead.
Thank you. So my name is Mark Rotich, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, implementing one of the GEC projects, focusing on the retention and learning outcomes for girls. Just a quick background on the situation in Kenya is that in the last decade, more than since the free primary school was rolled out, there's been an increased enrollment, but we still have some challenges in the in retention. So currently we have about 3 out of the 10 who enroll in school not completing the primary cycle. So we have 8 years of primary cycle in Kenya, and of the cohort that enroll, we always find about 3 out of 10 not completing the 8 years. And this is not uniform across the board. We have a lot of disparities in form of gender disparities, geographical disparities, and this tend to affect mostly the marginalized areas So we have lower retention in marginalized areas, and also in some areas, female has got lower retention in schools. In our own implementation of the project, GC project, which we started in 2013, by the completion of the first phase, which was 4 years, and operating in 500 schools, our dropout rate was 8%, which was significantly lower than the national average. But still, we could tell that there were still high dropouts within our school system. And so we began to think about how we need to tackle the issue of the dropouts in our schools. Two things that we looked at as major proxy indicators of retention. The first one was the learners' absenteeism. And here we picked what Rachel mentioned, that if a learner is out of school for 3 consecutive days, and then we consider that requiring some action. The second proxy indicator that we also use for retention was poor performance in school. And this we mean the kind of the assessments in the school, either at the end of the term or continuous assessment. So if the learner is performing poorly, we know that is one of the major indicators that the learner is likely to drop out of school. Next slide, please. So we went about to develop a system that we wanted the system to do 2 main things. The first one is to provide real-time data that could be used for decision making. And the second one is have a system of response that will take corrective action. So the system relies largely on the school data. The school data is collected, and we are using simple technology. We are using phones. We are also using tablets that has been populated with the school data, that is the learner's data. And so whenever there is an absence, that information is fed into a cloud system, which is analyzed, and information is given back to the schools, likely through the head teacher. There is also the other stakeholders that need to be given that information, and this is the community, also the girls themselves, and the community health volunteers, which I'll mention in a moment. Next slide. So the main feature of this system that I've just briefly described is that the schools, the teachers in the classroom collect data on a regular basis. They are required to collect data on a daily basis, and that information, we have digitized that information that they collect, and we categorize the learners into 2. One is those who are at risk of dropping, and this is the group that I mentioned, missing school for 3 consecutive days. And then there's also a group that have actually missed about more than 20% of the school time, and we consider those to be kind of permanently dropped out. And the information that we received is channeled through the short message system, that is the SMS system, and that goes into the 2 main areas that I mentioned earlier on. That is to go to the head teacher, and the head teacher will discuss this with the school board of management and consider what actions they need to take. The same SMS message also goes to the community health volunteers. The community health volunteers are community resource persons that are within the community, and they are well acquainted with the households, and their main role is to visit the households where the girls have missed school or have dropped out. Next slide. So once the information is received either by the school head or by the community health volunteer, it triggers certain activities. Some of the activities that trigger is to make household visits, and each of the learner is being mapped to a household. So it is easy for the household, the community health volunteer to visit the household that a girl has missed school. And within the schools, within the households, they will be able to establish the reasons why the girl is not in school. There is also other mechanisms that are triggered either in the school to understand what might be the push factors from the school, why the girl is going out of school. That might include things like performance, it might include teacher behavior, and that is taken care of by the school head and also the board of management. And so if in case the dropout has been kind of permanent, then we take corrective action by providing alternative pathways for the learner to re-enter into the school through what we call the catch-up system. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you some of the examples of the immediate actions that are taken at two different levels. The first level is the action that is taken at the community level, and the second one is that is taken at the individual level. I mentioned that the information is fed through the community health volunteer, and the community health volunteer is part of the community dialogue. So every community that is associated with the school have some discussions which we call the dialogues, and they discuss the kind of challenges, barriers, and opportunities for learning. And so when the information is fed to the community health worker, that information is also shared with the community. So one of the things we've been looking at within the project are the trends of absenteeism. And we noted in a number of areas that we operate in that there were very clear trends of absenteeism. And so, for example, we noted in some areas of counties that largely the absenteeism was on specific days. And we asked the community to discuss about what was happening in those specific days. And two things emerged. One of the things is that the two major drivers of absenteeism was market days, where the learners were involved by the households or parents to undertake some market activities. And also through the other main driver was the kind of burial ceremonies that happen. So having these discussions at the community level, they were able to make some decisions. One of the decisions they made was to shift the market days, moving it from the weekdays to the weekends, and also shifting some of the burial ceremonies days to the weekend days. So that's at the community level. At the individual level, the discussions that have been happening based on the information shared through the system at the household level has led to some of the decisions by the households to put their girls in boarding schools. A bit of context here is that most of the areas that we work in is in arid and semi-arid areas, and a lot of the most of the livelihoods is pastoralism. So the households keep moving in search of pasture, and so that movement affects the learning of the girls. So as a result of the information that we've been showing about the school absenteeism, some of the households have decided to put the girls in boarding schools. Secondly, the other response from the community is for girls to remain behind when the community move, and they make arrangements within the community of where the girls are going to stay. They could stay with one relative or stay with some of the a facility that is safe for them to stay when the rest of the other communities move in, largely in search of the pasture for the livestock. So what we've noted using this system is that the dropout is gone down. So you'll remember that I mentioned that in phase one, we saw about 8% of our learners dropping. So currently we are looking at about 1.5% of the learners dropping out in our system. And these are largely those who move out of the project area. Next slide. So just to give you some of the challenges that we face as we implement the system, I think some of the challenges has been mentioned by Rachel earlier on. So this system relies on timeliness of information reaching the required accountability or the holders of responsibility. And so we require internet, or internet is required to make sure that the information from the tablet or the phone is uploaded into the cloud, and that information is sent for people to analyze and also to take corrective action. And we have parts of the country that have poor or lack of internet connectivity. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is that this system relies on the accurate and timely input of data. And this is largely done by the teachers in school. So we note that the teacher motivation to regularly update the attendance is challenging for a number of reasons. One reason just I will mention is that because the school system still operates in two systems. One is the this digital system that we've introduced, and there's still the paper form. And so one of the responses we are trying to work with the ministry is to ensure that all attendance is moved to the digital platform. But nevertheless, we still have some challenges in the data being updated. The third challenge that we see is the fear of using the digital platform by either teachers or other users. And this is likely to do with the low levels of digital literacy. Although we are not using a very sophisticated system, still we see a number of users not being comfortable using the digital platform. However, we have opportunities for scaling up the system. Three main areas that I would just want to highlight in terms of opportunities. The first opportunity is that the Kenya government has rolled out a digital program in all the schools, providing two things. One is power connectivity to the schools, and secondly, giving out laptops and tablets in schools. We think that this provides an opportunity for using these laptops and tablets in terms of updating attendance and other important data that might be required. The final one is that we would like to improve the system, the government system, because they already have a digital system for updating information. But this system does not have the provision for providing an SMS alert. And we think that the SMS alert allows for timely and quick response to the issues that we mentioned about dropout for our learners. I think that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. So now we'll carry on swiftly to our next presenter, Nabi.
And thank you very much. Now we are moving towards the most, I think you are hearing me? Yeah?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so we are more now moving into the most robust and most intensive tracking system that we have been using through the Girls Education Challenge program in Nepal. So the project is implemented by the Morsiko in far western region of Nepal. So next slide, please. So this project is focusing on those girls who are mostly marginalized with the different types of vulnerabilities. One is they belongs to the indigenous caste who speaks their own language, but the whole curricula is in the national language Nepali. They speak their own language also in the class, and then they were kept as a bonded layer for a long time, and recently the government has announced that they are freed from that system, and then that is illegal. But also they have a lot of other marginalization. So we identify that having this marginalization, it is very essential to track them so that we'll provide a like enabling environment for them. So I would like to discuss a little bit, share about the current context of Nepal. So Nepal has recently moved into the federalization, and then we have a local election after 2 decades, so which provide a lot of opportunities, also a lot of challenges, moving into from the centralized system to the federalization. So the federalization structure also has a new education governance system. So the fund has been mobilized to the local level and also the provincial level. So the local government is authorized and responsible for using the big portion of the education program. And however, there is still centralized school level like education management information systems, which is more used by the central government to make the national planning and budgeting. And the central system cannot be used by the local government for their own planning and budgeting, which hinder a lot of initiatives that should be taken by the local government. And the image data is more related with the student only, their attendance only, but not focusing on the driving factors which can support girls for the better education. So one is language, like it hasn't specifically spelled out about language, teachers' capacity and teachers' attendance, which has a lot of influence in girls' learning. Yeah, next slide, please. So as I mentioned that there are a lot of intersection barriers in this context. So like the area where we are working, there is a lot of chances to have a natural disaster every year. The schools, the girls affected by the disaster, there is high migration rate, and also there is also a lot, like more than 54% of the girls who are belongs to the indigenous caste. So they have a very different kind of characteristics. So this system has been placed. So in this system we understand the population first, then prepare individual tracking system. The tracking system is sometimes like made in online platform, and sometimes we use for the hard copies like paper-based system. And then we mobilize the volunteers who can speak the local language. It is always difficult to have a conversation with them with the national language. And also we are also like try to involve them to understand their culture, the time for data collection, and the data entry and cleaning and finalization done by the project, and feed for the different program implementation, and also share to the schools and communities. So in this data collection, we usually collect the data of in school girls every year. And also we also collect the data collection daily attendance registered in the classes, but mostly used by the teachers and some of our volunteers. And then also that also supplement the school development plan. So, and we also have a different data collection system for the out of school scores, which is based on the activity timeline, and then we do follow up with them in every quarter. But in the classroom, the teachers are like and the social mobilizer are responsible to follow up with the students who regularly miss their class for 3 days. And they use, first of all, they use their peers to track them and understand why they are not attending the class. And if they find out any severity or any kind of situation, then we provide programmatic support. Next slide, please. So why individual tracking? So first of all, because our beneficiaries represents from the marginalized community, so we are reaching out to the most marginalized girls, which is sometimes very difficult. And second one, understand the transition, because there is a high mobility, so we would like to understand that one and offer tailored intervention. So understanding their problems and circumstances, the program and also the schools provide different kind of tailor-made intervention to them, and also right fit of the skills and knowledge, and also ensure inclusive participation. Some of the times, mostly the high caste girls and like other students, they get chance to participate in the school activities and other extracurricular activities over there. So we would like to understand ensure that everyone participate in different aspect of the education and adaptation of intervention very quickly, and also maintain the robust data, which provide a different kind of disaggregated information for the project or for the schools and the local government. Next slide, please. So basically, we do our data collection in 4 steps. So first of all, before starting any interventions or any academic year, we use this system while we invite the girls and other students. So during the enrollment or initiation of the girls club or any remedial class, so the schools and the project use the data collection here. And the second one is participation in activities. So some of the times we invite all the people, all the girls in the class, but we find out there are some girls are missing. So we also ensure that there is like a participation of everyone in the activities. And also the school level data collection and analysis. This is basically focused on the school register and the attendance taken by the teachers, and regular follow-up within the communities based on data. So we also do a different kind of data collection at communities also. So during this process, the dropout region is recorded. So some of the times the national system just only focus on the girls are dropout, but the region is not highlighted there. So the schools and the community cannot take action. So we always try to understand the region. If the dropout girls are living within the project area, then we do a lot of intensive follow-up, and also like we have designed activities that supports household to support the girls, which is called family dialogue, where we talk with the family for 3 months and focus on their changing their behaviors and attitude to support the girls. And we also provide follow-up supports based on the information. And also some of the time we also change our activity and design. Some of the time we choose the different timings. So we find out that there is a low attendance in the seasonal like a farming season, and also some of the festivals in Nepal. So we try to incorporate different kind of local initiatives like Easter drama, reaching out to the household visits to ensure that all the girls come back to their schools. Next slide, please. So having this intensive activities focusing on the most marginalized girls here in Nepal. So we found that though the system is very intensive and require a lot of effort, however, like having participation from the different stakeholders, like not only the teachers, but also the peer of the girls, and also their parents and the teachers, we could really move the dropout number. So we had just finished our midline evaluation, where we find that there is 0% dropout of the girls from our cohort. Wherever in compared to the control group, we found that there is 2% dropout in the same communities. So the number is very small, but like there is a high risk of having seasonal migration or early marriage in that in this location. So we also found that we also find out like the girls also why they didn't upgrade their classes. Then we found out that they are repeating the grade because of not enough time for to attend the schools, low absenteeism. Some girls are sick, some girls are migrated, and then they couldn't able to attend the examination during that time. But we were try to reach out to their family, and then now they are repeating the same grade, and the schools provided some additional support like remedial classes to these girls, and also the project is also providing some like a mentoring and also the girls club to these girls. So, and the second one, with having this intensive system and working with the local government, we find out that the local government are ready to increase the budget in located area. They are providing some additional interventions to support the retention in the schools, like a school meals program, support for the girls to maintain the wash facilities at the schools, providing some scholarship to the girls, and also providing some other supports targeted to the specific girls like Dalit, like low caste, and girls with disabilities. And we are also working with because we saw that there is a huge opportunity in this new system, and there is a huge resources in local level, but there is low capacity within the local government. So we are working with the local government to utilize this system at local level and to feed all the information received from this system in their yearly education plan and budgeting. So this has been already integrated by the local government in the area where we are working, and also the provincial government is also willing to expand and scale up this system within that province in Nepal. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Navin. So the fascinating set of presentations there. Now we're going to go over to Ian Apfield for an initial response. Ian.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Cameron, and I hope everybody can hear me clearly.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to focus my remarks around two topics. The first is the relevance to national policymakers, this macro-national and micro-local data systems, and then secondly around the interplay between both student and teacher. Is also you might query the relevance of the Girls' Education Challenge's wide portfolio of projects, which Rachel's outlined. How is this relevant to national EMIS data systems, education sector plans, sector policies, particularly around equity and approaches to increase attention and learning? We're aware that there's been a tremendous growth in systems capacity and outreach in GPE over the last few years. These systems are great to see those large scale patterns of enrollment of students. But to track accurately attendance data, that's of both students and teachers, and linking it in the sort of near to real-time way that has been described today to address retention problems, I feel is still generally beyond the capability of most national EMIS systems. Clearly, as we just heard from Navin from the Nepal project, that there are limitations of national EMIS systems and some clear benefits of making individual tracking systems. Just to give some context, currently Nepal has a really strong national EMIS system and a really strong and valued data set nationally. I looked up recently, around 1 in 8 students in grade 1 either drop out or repeat the first grade of primary. There's a response, which is to have every year a re-enrollment back to school campaign targeted for out of school children. But I feel it somehow neglects this need to really understand at the micro, the school, the child community level, what's going on with attendance and why it is that 1 in 8 children seem to be repeating or dropping out, rather than just say, let's get everybody back into school. We have to sort of dig deeper, drill deeper into the problems. Most developed nations generally rely on school or local government MIS systems, a school data system, an attendance register. They tend to be very heterogeneous, but certainly they can be extremely effective. I'm sure I'm not the only parent on this webinar who's received some automated notices about their own children's attendance or lack of attendance at school. I'd reference to, I think, early on in the slide pack from Rachel, a fifth slide, which showed these concentric cycles of a local data system feeding and contributing, moving outwards to national data policy and systemic choices, because these are really vital for national policymakers around data and progression who are on this call to consider. And I really think that the Girls' Education Challenge extensive portfolio of locally contextualized solutions can really add some value. The Girls' Education Challenge examples we've seen today exhibits a growing trend for simple, generally free, open source, quick to adapt data systems. Many can be used on smartphones that many of the teachers or staff may own themselves. You can limit hardware costs, and they can rapidly develop. The opportunity, I think, to consider is how national or regional, provincial, state level actors can actually support local level actors at the school or community level, but without trying to micromanage or to really overexpand into huge, national surveillance systems that aren't really practical. To me, some of the key is to define simple data items that you think can predict both the risk of dropout or vulnerability. For example, a student's gender, their parental or household background, their language, perhaps their disability, and then using these patterns of behavior, perhaps low attendance, low performance on assessment, to trigger these early warning systems of response. We've already referred to, I think, some great work done by the UNICEF Europe and Central Asia office, and I think that's linked in one of the slide packs, and I think that's a great document for people to think in further. The key thing is to say many of these things can't be implemented nationally. The examples we've seen from GEC show the importance of the response, and that a response to low or erratic attendance isn't necessarily always being able to be done by head teachers or teachers. You need the buy-in of community actors, the PTA, the school management committee, mothers group, social workers in some instances. This is probably a lot more important than the tech. And even without tech, local paper-based systems can probably still work fine. We see, from Mark's example in Kenya, a very low dropout rate, under 2%, and a range of activities. In Nepal, we've seen similar, control versus treatment, strong drops in repetition and dropout. When you really drill in to try to understand what are the actual reasons why a student may be absent frequently, we often hear reasons: the student's lazy, parents don't care, they don't value education. These are common responses we'll hear. But often, if you really drill in, you might have different responses. Is this interplay between teacher and student attendance? Teacher attendance and accurately tracking student dropout is challenging, especially for marginalised children and girls. Teachers may perceive incorrectly that these children matter less, but clearly their attendance is keen. Please be aware of some assumptions and prejudices. The World Bank Service Delivery Indicator work that's gone on throughout Africa has shown some really graphic data in how time on task can really drop. Time on task is the interaction between a student and a teacher. Apologies if the sound quality is going. I'll go slower, and I think I'm almost finished. Often less than half of the official teaching hours are actually delivered. These raise challenging questions. Should a child walk a long way to school if the teacher is not absent? How reliable are those student records? And what can we do to motivate teachers to keep accurate records? I think school leadership and setting expectations on this is really vital. So I'm really pleased to see that this rich data from the Girls' Education Challenge can be shared. We'll be writing this work up and sharing reports around it. And I said we're going further with a Leave No Girl Behind portfolio, which is really looking at approaches for marginalised adolescent girls who've already dropped out of school and ways to reintroduce them and to reintegrate them into education. And perhaps that could be a topic for a future GPE webinar when we have more information. So apologies if the sound quality hasn't always been great. I'll stop there. Thanks, Cameron and everybody.
Thank you very much, Ian. And apologies to everyone for the various technical problems we're having. I have posted a link to Ian's notes on Google Docs for anyone who was unable to hear everything he was saying. So maybe to start off the discussion, I could ask our presenters if they would like to make a quick response to Ian's points. Maybe starting with Rachel.
Hi there. Yes, so I think it's really helpful to contextualize the data systems that we're collecting with the national EMIS pieces that Ian referenced. And that's certainly something that we are really exploring and looking into. And I think there was a question, I have been scanning the questions online about how we're doing that. And I think there are some snapshots of some really interesting examples of how the practices that have been initiated at this local level have informed some of the national policy changes, whether that's in terms of creating these community engagement structures around the school, or in terms of embedding disability data into attendance tracking systems. So there's some great examples there, and I think it's really important to remember how those connections can work. So yeah, thank you, Ian, for your reflections.
Thank you, Rachel. Nabin and Mark, would you like to come back to on Ian's points?
Yeah, I think those were great points, and I agree with them. I think one point I want to make is that generally the governments are interested in improving their EMIS systems, but they are always generally underfunded because the main constraint is that most of the funding is going towards salaries of teachers and very little to this kind of real data. But there is a lot of interest among the educators to improve the retention, particularly in the affected areas. So, but I think the main challenge is the resources, and I think one of the issues that the projects can try and demonstrate is the cost effectiveness of how the system can improve to make this a reality for the governments. Thank you.
Nabin, any response?
Actually, like agreeing with all the point that Ian has shared, like yeah, we're also like kind of facilitating the system here, like and supporting the government. So yeah, because when we start something together with them, then it will also provide opportunities for learning both sides. So the same thing happened with the JC program in Nepal, so that there is a huge interest from the government and also the local government officials to set up these things. But the challenge is how can they really develop this system? So we are trying to prepare a kind of policy brief which will support us to prepare this system with a very low cost and also utilizing the local resources rather than the advanced technology here in Nepal, because we are a little bit behind on the technology system here. So yeah, with agreeing with those points, like the program will continue its engagement with the government system here.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we've had a number of questions on our YouTube channel. Thank you everyone for the great discussion that's been going on there. Maybe to start off with one that's relating a bit to Ian's comments. Kobia from Oxfam IBIS for EOL Program Regional Management in Kampala has asked us about cases where data collected via local systems has been used to influence national policy. So would you be able to say a bit more about how the local data collection systems in your projects are influencing national policy, or if there are moves towards making that happen? Mark, Navin, or Rachel? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I can add a little bit to what I mentioned before, but I think that dynamic is really important to make sure that it's really intentional. And I am very aware that when we're thinking about inclusion, that inclusion is very difficult to unpick on a national and system level, which is where these localized systems and these individualized retention follow-up mechanisms are really important to unpick the dimensions that might be influencing attendance. So being able to contribute that element and that learning to those national systems is so important. And we've seen some really interesting examples of how disability focused projects have been able to assist and work alongside some of the regional government structures to improve their mechanisms to support teacher training and coaching to ensure that teachers are much better at that inclusive and participatory piece in the classroom. And so there have been a number of great examples of that interplay of learning from these more intense systems with the national policy changes that we've seen. And that's something that we are integrating and growing as a more intentional part of the picture going forward. But maybe Navin, you can add a little bit more to the Nepali context.
Yeah, actually, like there are a few examples, like because we also asked the dropout region with the girls, so we also found that like there are various kind of dropout. That one is more related to the enrollment, like their enrollment during the time of the start of the academic year, because most of the girls they were not informed by the schools or not informed by the local government. So we identify that because of not having information prior to the academic year, they get delayed in their admission in the school. So that now the government has very specifically started the enrollment campaign, not only in the schools but also in the households. That has been scaled everywhere in the Sudur Pasim province, Far West province. And the second one, like when we had a lot of discussion with the girls, like why they didn't regularly attend their class. Then another problem is the ministerial hygiene, because having sanitation pad in the schools, like they are facing a lot of challenges. So recently, along with the local government, the national government has started this side of these small initiatives, but that will really support for the girls for the continuation of their education.
Great, thank you. So let's move on to another question. There's a question from Alice Castillejo from Translators Without Borders, which is about the language question. Has GEC drawn together any data from across its programs to understand to what extent language is a factor in enrollment and retention? And she adds that global research shows that language of instruction is a major inhibitor to educational progress for children from marginalized language communities. Mark or Navin, would you like to respond to that point on language as a factor?
Yeah, maybe I can start and others can add. I think we monitor that largely for the early grades. I think in our Kenya context, the language of instruction for the early grades is the language of the catchment, which means this should be the language that is used at the household level. However, there are challenges in the cosmopolitan areas, especially the urban areas, where there's no uniform or homogeneous language that is being used. In that case, the two main languages are used, which is the English language, and in other areas, Kiswahili, which is also a national language. We still see that there is a discrepancy between what the policy says and what is done in practice, in the sense that even in other areas where there is homogeneous language being used in an area, English and Kiswahili are preferred as the language of instruction. And in the Kenya context, this is really because the teachers tend to be not from the local area in most of the most affected areas. So this makes it very challenging for the same language to be used in the household and also in the schools as a language of instruction. But we do know that that affects the kind of retention. But I think it's quite a challenge to try and implement it, given that some of the teachers do not speak those local languages. Thank you.
Thanks, Nabin. Would you like to comment on the language issue? Has that been relevant?
Actually, we haven't that like a kind of data based like a language and the retention. However, like there is a strong evidence that the language also affect the learning, and also sometimes also the concentration of the girls in the school. So in Nepal, like in one communities, people speak different language, and most of the teachers who are mobilized on those schools are more using the Nepali language, the native Nepali speakers. So the girls face a lot of challenge to understand the other contents, like basically the social science and other pedagogies, which are mostly related to their life and their work. So we also identify that some of the times when we use the local language, it is more it increases a lot of efficiency in learning. So I think it is very important to have some understanding about the language, and also put that as like kind of major areas to focus in the enrollment or any other things. And also if we are not messaging the girls during the enrollment in a local language, that may also like make a lot of difficulties, not only for the girls, for also their parents to send their girls at schools.
Okay, thanks. So we had a question about disability and whether the projects track disability, which is a great opportunity to plug the fact that in the coming months we'll be having another webinar based on the Girls' Education Challenge data, but looking specifically at some projects which have been collecting disability data and how they've been using that. But still for now, would anyone like to comment on whether you've been collecting disability data and how that's been used?
Yes, I'm happy to respond to that. So across the GC, we do have a disability inclusive approach. So disability data using the Washington group set is collected across the board, across all of projects in their evaluation data. When it comes to monitoring data, that has been filtered into a number of different areas across the projects, but it's not as universal as the evaluation level currently. When it comes to retention systems, we have seen many of those including data on disability at that level. But as you know, that only really gives half the picture. And I think if we're thinking about the whole cycle of retention, that data on impairment is only the starting point, and it's really important to be able to follow up with those individuals to understand why that particular issue might be preventing the girl from attending school, because as we know, the impairment is only part of the picture. The environmental and the social dimensions are the elements that really create that disability. And so being able to follow up with a girl to tune into which of those elements might be causing a problem, and being able to address those on an individualized basis is really important as part of that disability lens. But much more broadly, within GEC programs, we're doing quite a lot of work in terms of disability inclusion and awareness with communities, with schools and management systems and so on, to make sure that that is very much part of the inclusion agenda within the communities that we're working in, to ensure that families are really prioritizing education for girls who may have any form of impairment that might be affecting their engagement with education. So yes, it's part of this much broader picture, but yes, it's certainly part of some of the retention systems, and is an important part of us being able to tune in to some of the reasons why girls may be struggling with attendance.
Thanks, Rachel. I had a specific question to Mark Rotich about the Kenya project, which was whether there was a cost analysis of the activities and their long-term sustainability through school and local community systems. And perhaps that's a good opportunity to ask more broadly about the Girls' Education Challenge programs. To what extent are they designed with longer-term sustainability and the beyond donor financing in mind, in terms of their cost analysis and whether they can be taken on by government or by other local systems?
So thank you. I think I'll respond that in two parts. The first part is to say that in the project design, we have put two main strands of sustainability. The first one is really to ensure that the design and implementation involves the system, which is the government system. And the idea there is to ensure that the capacity and the knowledge that is built by this project is retained beyond the project period. And so all the activities and all the planning is done with and through the government. The second one is also we see that the activities themselves are self-sustaining in the sense that most of this are to do with community structures that are already in place. So if you look at what I mentioned, that we are using an SMS alert to community health volunteers, this is a system that is already in place, used by the government, and also that the community themselves are driving the community health volunteers. So, however, there is a bit of components that are slightly difficult to maintain as it is, because as I mentioned, we are using some of the tablets, we're using some of the phones. So essentially, what we think that the government should be thinking about is the cost of using the tablets and the phones that they already have in the system, which are provided by the government. So there will be some kind of recurrent cost that is required, which I mentioned as a form of internet connectivity. So in our planning, we have tried to make this low cost and something that the government can reach. But we do know, as I mentioned, that usually government have constraints of resources, and most of the resources go to things like salaries. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like
Yes, as Ian. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that question around sustainability and cost effectiveness, because these are, vital. And there's been a lot of work through the Girls' Education Challenge in trying to really embed, both at the school and at the larger system level, sustainability across all of its work, not just the data retention systems, around teaching and learning, around many of the other activities around making the schools gender sensitive, professional development, tackling violence. It's very heterogeneous, I would say, with the data systems about what you can sustain given the very rapid pace and change of both hardware and software and solutions. I think one of the key learning is about making data systems as simple as possible, and wherever possible, making use of hardware, generally phone technology, which is freely available, and generally people have those devices. So there's pointers there, but clearly, decisions about, ultimately it's the acid test of any intervention is whether actors want to continue it. And I think it was really heartening to hear from Navin in Nepal just the fact that they're working with local governments to see what are the elements that they wish to take forward from the STEM project in Nepal. Thank you.
Thanks. Great. So we had a question from Mohini Venkatesh, which is a question addressed to us at GPE and to DFID and other organizations. And the question is, how can we work together to get chronic absenteeism as a key indicator for school participation in UNESCO UIS? The current measure of attendance rates hides the gravity of the absenteeism. If schools track the percentage of students who missed 10 to 19% of days or more than 20% of school days, it would be more meaningful to them and to the school districts to be responsive. So perhaps this is also a question for, I guess, national governments and for the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. But it's an interesting one about whether at the global level we would want to try and track absence from school in a more nuanced way. We currently have attendance rates and enrollment rates. Ian, do you have any comments on that from a DFID perspective, tracking absenteeism globally?
It's a really interesting idea. I think that my general perspective would be that it would be very difficult to sort of make chronic absenteeism into a global indicator. If you made the analogy that chronic absenteeism is like a severe sickness, and then death is where you completely drop out and stop attending, you could say that it's a predictor and something which requires intervention. That's the sort of analysis or analogy we're making with the early warning systems. And obviously early warning is often referred to in famine relief, in flood and disaster prediction. I think the problem with trying to do that is that almost you don't need to, because other global or national indicators, just like the example I gave on high rates of grade 1 repetition, a system will never get its survival rates up if you don't tackle high levels of repetition and dropout in the first 3 grades of primary education, for example. So in a sense, you probably don't need to track chronic absenteeism nationally, because you can see it immediately in some of the other measures of retention, survival rates, cohort analysis, which is done, I think, really well by UIS and obviously shown every year in the GEM reports. And I think definitional issues and again trying to collect accurate absenteeism records from all children, when typically what's being recorded is individual enrollment per year, while individual data tracking systems globally I think are rightly getting a lot more attention with the growth of unique identifiers for individual. I'm not sure how much we would gain by that idea, but it's a really fascinating one to think further. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that thought, which is something for us to consider. There's another question for Mark, which is from Michael from CAMFED, the Campaign for Female Education. You mentioned, Mark, that you work with and through government throughout, but the question is firstly, are the schools you work with in government schools or managed by the project? And there's a second question, which is what changes were made with regard to absenteeism caused by burial ceremonies? So what was the program's response to that issue, which you highlighted?
Okay, thank you. So the first response is about the schools that we work in. So we largely work through government schools. We have also low-cost private schools. The reason why we have low-cost private schools in our project is because these low-cost private schools are situated in some of the marginalized areas. This includes the slums and also in some of the far-flung areas where there are no government schools. But our approach is to ensure that even the low-cost private schools have a link and meet the standards of the Ministry of Education. So I think the main challenge there is that in some places there are no available government schools. But generally, most of our schools are the government schools. So we work in government schools as well as the low-cost private schools in the marginalized areas. The second aspect of it was about the question on what changes happen in the burial rights. So to give a bit of context is that some of the communities that we work with have burial rights that include a period of mourning and where family members are required to attend some of those ceremonies. And some of these ceremonies happen during the day and some during the night. So some of the things that we have worked with the community is to ensure that some of the ceremonies do not happen from Monday to Friday. The school generally run in primary cycle Monday to Friday. So we have been able to convince and work with the communities to put most of the funeral and burial rites to the weekends, which is Saturday or Sunday. The second thing is also we've put some work around the community to agree some norms for the participation of children, so including agreeing that some of the ceremonies that would be done at night that put some girls at risk could be done during the day or done under supervision of some parents or some caregivers. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. So with that, that's brought us pretty much to the end of our time today. So I would just like to thank all of our presenters very much for your time and for these really fascinating set of presentations. To thank Ian Atfield for his excellent commentary at the end. And to thank everyone who's joined us today. Thank you for bearing with us during a few technical glitches. And especially for all those who have asked questions. I think it's highlighted really some really interesting lessons about how programs can generate monitoring data which can be used to track attendance and help keep children in school, and to sort of generate lessons which can be used more broadly by education systems, not kind of confined to the specific program that the data originates in. As I mentioned briefly before, we are planning to have another session in the coming months, which will be about the data from the Girls' Education Challenge, specifically on disability and how that's been used. And we will be advertising that in the forthcoming weeks. We'll also be sharing all the materials from this webinar, the presentations and a summary note. And you'll be able to access a full recording of the discussion on YouTube shortly. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and we'll close there for today.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.